What was your strangest experience that made you want to believe in the paranormal? I've told this story before on Reddit. My aunt committed suicide while I was in my early 20s. I went home from university to grieve with the family and help. Since I didn't have my own room or bed, I slept on the couch for the duration of my stay. The layout of the house is important, so forgive the momentary sidebar. The garage door opens into the living room, which shares an open floor plan with the kitchen. The couch is used as a divider between the spaces, kind of free-floating in the middle of the space with its back to the kitchen. The kitchen is a double height that is open to a second-story mezzanine, so that if you're exiting the master bedroom you could look over the railing into the kitchen, or diagonally into the living room. So, I'm on the couch with my blankets and pillow watching Pawn Stars quietly and trying to fall asleep when I get that creeped out feeling. It's like when you're reading scary stories and you just have to check behind you or in a corner or something. I try ignoring the urge, but eventually I give in and heave myself up from the sunken couch to check over the back and into the kitchen, fully expecting nothing to be there. He was completely nude with no genitals. Smooth grayish, almost bluish skin that the underlights of the kitchen cabinets made almost transparent over his ribs and lungs. I distinctly remember watching the fast flutter of his breathing. His eyes and mouth were black holes and slanted, as if you bunched up all the skin on the back of his head and pulled taut. No hair. And the arms and fingers were elongated so that they hung past his knees. He didn't do anything, he just stared at me with an open mouth, but I remember feeling so afraid that I shouldn't be looking at him. Then I woke up. I never remember falling asleep, but quickly sprang from the couch and turned on all the downstairs kitchen lights. Of course nothing was there. Had this same dream 2 more nights. Same thing every time, incredibly lucid. Never remember the transition of watching television to sleep. The thing never moved closer or did anything, but always awoke with panic. Now, naturally my parents were curious why every morning they came downstairs the lights were all on, and when everything finally came to a head is when my stepmother and I were sharing breakfast alone. My father has taken my younger siblings out for something fun to get their minds off the approaching funeral. My stepmother isn't very spiritual, more of a soccer mom than a hippie mom. She corners me and asks what's been going on, if I'm okay, etc. I explain that I've been having nightmares and begin to divulge the dream, and I can tell she wants to speak and interrupt with great urgency. She explains, slightly panicked, that she has also been having bad dreams. In her dream, she awakes from bed scared that something is wrong with my siblings. Leaving the master bedroom to check on them across the hall, she thinks to check on me and so peers down into the kitchen, living room. And then she sees someone standing in the kitchen, looking at her, and she wakes up. While my stepmother is not spiritual, my grandmother is and had burnt sage around my aunt's house where she committed suicide to cleanse it. She has dropped off a box of my aunt's things 3 nights previously, when the dreams started, and had left some of the burnt sage in there. It was almost completely unvoiced, our agreement to get the sage and burn it around the house, giggling at our silliness, but hey, never had the nightmares again after that. No fucking idea. Obviously I can rationalize that grief does weird shit to people. Maybe it was just my psyche hallucinating with sleep paralysis, who knows. My stepmother and I just know that it was really strange and very frightening. This is my first paranormal experience that cemented my belief. I've always been interested in the paranormal. Even as a kid I'd watch hours of the show on Discovery Channel A Haunting. My best friend at the time, however, was not. She was a Christian girl, who wanted nothing to do with it. So when we hung out it wasn't really a topic of discussion between us, because I knew it creeped her out. One day, we're at her house. We were young, so we were playing with Polly Pockets. At some point we're both holding our dolls, but we're not playing, we were talking about something else. When the conversation came to a lull we both were silent and looked to the corner of her room with her closet. This closet had a purse on the door handle. All of a sudden the purse shakes on the door handle, really hard. So hard it almost made a loop around the handle. So it couldn't have been AC. No windows were open because it was winter. Both of her sisters were asleep, and her parents were both downstairs. I didn't think she saw it at first, so I tried to play it cool. I knew how much that stuff scared her. But she saw it, and we both screamed bloody murder. No one believed us, and no one believes us to this day. I've had a lot of weird things happen to me. Most can probably be explained. But to this day, nothing can explain how hard that purse shook on the door handle. I've had more than a couple paranormal experiences. One was a little boy in my parents' house. He walked from my brother's room, through the closed door that went into my parents' room. He looked like my brother, but my brother had already gone to school, being in middle school while I was in elementary still. It was only me, my mom, and my infant brother in the house. But I know for sure I saw this little boy. He was blonde, pale, and dressed in a white dress shirt and black pants. And he walked through a closed door. When I told my mom what I saw, she didn't believe me at first. She thought I was trying to play a game with her. But a few years later she told me she ended up seeing that same little boy. Just a little under a year ago, I saw a man in my apartment. My ex was over and I had went to bed early so I could go to work the next morning. I woke up to the sound of rustling and saw a man at the end of my bed, frantically rummaging through things at the end of my bed. I thought it was my ex because in the dark, it looked vaguely like him. Tall, dark hair, same sort of style. I asked him what he was looking for, still thinking it was my ex. The man froze and looked at me, and he was definitely not my ex. There was a moment where we just stared at each other and he looked confused. And then I watched him just fade into nothing. I booked it out of my room and told my ex, who shrugged it off. He tried to say it was just me dreaming. But I know it wasn't. I was able to move and talk. There was no moment where I woke from the dream. As soon as this man disappeared, I ran as fast as could out of the room. So yeah, only 2 times I've seen like full body apparitions, but I've had other experiences that can't explain. My brother, my husband, and I all decided to go catfishing one night. As usual, we get there around dusk, pick out spots, and gather firewood before dark. Night falls, it's a breezy early summer evening, and the sky is cloudless and full of stars. But it's a new moon, so still quite dark. We're fishing, not catching more than a few perch, and it's getting close to 1 a.m. so we're starting to talk about packing up. But first, the guys head down river a short ways, only about 50 yards, maybe less, to check a few other spots. I stay by the fire and decide to lay down a little and enjoy the quiet. A few minutes goes by and vertical bar hear my brother call out, "Hey, are those flashlights?" I sit up and look where he's pointing, a spot upstream and across the water past me. Flashlights would be kinda odd because of the location and time of night. Anyone who would be out there would have already been there. There's 3 little round lights, and they do look like flashlight beams. But not really. For one, they're very concentrated and circular, there's no beam. That part of the riverbank is also a very steep, muddy cliff, just full of brush, so it's kinda weird that there's someone there when there's at least half a dozen easier ways to approach. And the lights aren't moving right. They're sort of erratic, but the movements are smooth and don't bounce like someone walking down a cliff would be moving a flashlight, and the movements are in sort of figure 8 patterns, one breaking off and moving to the side before rejoining the others. We watch for a minute, commenting how weird they're acting. But if it's another person, we need to know, cause they aren't getting closer and apparent flashlights just pointing at us is creepy behavior. So, I move over to where they were sitting, and my husband and brother take off at a brisk pace towards where the lights are. I'm watching the weird things, and as the guys get closer they start really getting weird. One vanished completely before reappearing not 30 seconds later. In the top of a pecan tree that had to have been 15 feet tall at least. The other 2 split, one heading upstream where the guys are about to round a cluster of brush before they hit the water's edge and could see the other bank clearly, and the third one sort of hovering towards me but then back. The guys round the brush, and as soon as they do, the lights flash once and all of them blink out suddenly. The guys are peering across with their own flashlights. I can see the beams faintly from where I am, but see and hear absolutely nothing. We never heard anything at all, No brush crackling or twigs snapping, no water splashing. They head back and we all unanimously decide that that was fucking weird and it's time to leave. Multiple visits to that spot afterwards and it still produced some fish for us in the daylight, but when night hit we would never get a single nibble. We all still talk about it sometimes, and we've still never figured out what the fuck those lights were. We tried scaling that bank at a later date, in the daytime, and it's just not possible at that exact location because of the steep cliff and dense brush. You can get from that side to the river, but you have to come out in a spot that's about 30 years upstream and further back. No explanation. No, it was not fireflies, they didn't flicker and were blue-white. This is a long story, so sit back. And I promise it's true. When I was a kid, I had an imaginary friend named Hey Mitch. Pretty basic stuff for a kid. He was cool and all. My parents and I still remember me playing with him, but like all kids, I outgrew him, and around that time, keep in mind I was about 3, so I don't exactly remember the order of events, my nightmares got interesting. Every person has nightmares, but in mine the person trying to kill me, hunt me down or whatever was always Hey Mitch. Which was creepy, yeah, but it got a bit weirder when on a holiday to Ibiza when I was 9, I bought a dream catcher. Hung it above my bed, and vertical bar, swear to you, I never got another nightmare. I was cured and no longer being hunted by my imaginary friend. Then one day when I was about 16 or 17, I had a friend over, one of those spiritual crystal girls, who saw the dream catcher hanging above my bed and said it doesn't work there, it will work better over here, so moved it. I didn't say anything, classic introvert, but in the following 7 days, my no-nightmare streak was broken. Very broken. I got 3 nightmares that week. All featuring Hey Mitch. In one particular one, the middle of the 3, it began like a normal dream. I was sitting on my bed, door open, and my phone rang. I picked it up and it was Markiplier. I don't particularly watch his content, but a deaf guy would know his voice. And he asked me if I wanted to meet up. I replied, I know you're not Markiplier, and there was a second pause. I got up from the bed and there was a silhouette across the hall. And a voice, recognized, cried out from the phone, Sophie, why did you forge? And the dream ended. Needless to say, I moved that dream catcher straight back, but I still got those nightmares. One of the creepiest things about the story is that to this day, nobody in my family has any idea where I got the name Hey Mitch from. Nobody I know even knows a Hey Mitch, so where Kid Me got the name from is still a mystery. Is this paranormal? Not entirely certain, but it's creepy and there's certainly something going on. Anyways, thanks for reading this because damn is this a long story. I'm not a religious guy, not at all. Don't believe in crystals or the healing power of essential oils. Rational science all the way. But I met an angel. It was the day I learned that my mother had died. Got a phone call from my sister, packed a bag and jumped on a train for the 150-mile journey home. Now when I tell people about being an alcoholic, I usually say that it started when I lost my parents, but that's not the truth. Vertical bar was pretty much a booze hound by the time my mother passed. And the thing about being a booze hound is alcohol is always on your mind. It's the first thing you think of when anything remotely challenging takes place, so you can believe that getting a drink, a whole lot of drinks, was high on my list of priorities that morning. But the other thing about being an alcoholic is secrecy. You hide your drinking, you're convinced people know that there's something wrong with you. So I raced to the train station, and I plan that when I have to change trains I'll have time to rush across the road to a shop I know. Alcoholics always know the nearest place to get alcohol, and buy some booze to tide me over on the 4 hours journey home. The plan works. I buy strong lager and generic whiskey, get a suitably concealed double seat and settle down to drink until vertical bar don't care that my mother has died. On some level I still wonder if I was trying to kill myself. The amount of alcohol I'd bought was unusual. There is a little stretch of rail on the south coast where there seems to be a station every half a mile, and I had not begun my first beer before we stop and a passenger gets on. She is a tiny Asian woman, older than me. She looks at the numerous empty seats and chooses the one next to me. At this time I am in my mid-30s, overweight, unshaven, clearly recently been crying. My stay away vibe should have been loud and clear, but she chose to sit by me. I am thwarted, can't drink myself numb, or to death, with her sitting there. Remember, the drinking is secret, so I'll just wait her out. As soon as she gets off I'll start my drinking. We sit in silence for a while, then she starts talking. She is fascinating. She was Marie Therese, born in Vietnam, a war orphan. She was adopted by an order of nuns that she chose to join when she was old enough. She had worked for charities around the world and had her own adopted daughter. We spoke, she told me stories, we shared glacier mints, my booze stayed in its carrier bag. She was in no way what wanted, but she was absolutely what I needed at that time. When I came to my home city, I dumped the bag in a litter bin and went home to my family. Don't get me wrong, she didn't cure me, no one can do that. Alcoholics cure themselves, every day, one day at a time. I've been sober for 15 years, but at the time my worst days of alcoholism were yet to come. What she did spared my father having to deal with a dead wife and a hopelessly drunk son on the same day. What she did was maybe save my life from a half-assed suicide attempt. I have enough regrets from the time I was drinking. I am profoundly grateful that she spared me that one. I know on one level that she was a human being. But if God was created by man to give a name to the best of our thoughts, perhaps angels are a name for the best of our actions. That means we can all be angels for someone. Be someone's angel. And if someone knows a Vietnamese nun named Marie Therese who lived in the UK in 2007, hug her, spin her around until she laughs. She is my angel. Over a decade ago, my boyfriend at the time convinced me to use a Ouija board with him. I lived with him in his parents' home, and we had separate rooms. Mine was in the basement and his on the main floor. We were both skeptics, so it was a ha-ha what if sort of thing. I don't remember exactly how the conversation went, but I remember hello, confusion, panic, and then a forced goodbye. I assumed he was moving the thing to mess with me, but he definitely wasn't behind the inexplicable experiences I started having afterward. The first thing I remember was a few weeks later. I was in his room with him. He was listening to music quietly, with headphones on. We decided to take a nap. He paused the music video and laid with me on the bed. He fell asleep. I was half asleep, about 30 minutes later, and randomly opened my eyes. Just in time to see the music video, not the whole web page, just the player, refreshing. Music started playing at max volume out of the speakers, not the headphones he had been using, and not at the reasonable volume he always had it set to. He woke with a start and we spent the next hour trying to duplicate the event to no avail. Then there was the time I was alone in the house. I was at the kitchen sink, washing dishes. Behind me to the right, the stairs to the basement. To my left, the hallway to the bedrooms. Old house. Makes noise. I heard the squeal of my bedroom door opening downstairs, so I turned the water off and listened. I heard the definitive clunk of my bedroom door being shut. In true horror film fashion, I stood there dumbly, frozen. I heard nothing for a few seconds, ostensibly the amount of time it takes to get from my bedroom door to the foot of the stairs, and then, the creaking of each individual step from the basement to the main floor. From there, I heard footfalls and more creaking. The unmistakable sound of someone walking from the stairs to my left, across the kitchen behind me, toward the hallway to my right. The clear sound of footsteps subsided as the creaking continued on in a carpeted area. It went to the end of the hall, where, coincidentally, perhaps, my boyfriend's room was. It stopped for a few seconds. It turned around. It went all the way back through the house and down the stairs. It opened my bedroom door. It shut it. I stood there for a few more seconds before my vision started going black. I realized I hadn't been breathing the whole time. I tried to never sleep in my room again after that, but his parents were very strict. The last incident remember was when he and I went out for a smoke in the middle of the night. His dad slept in the living room, so the house was pitch black and we had to be very quiet. He walked in front of me. When we got to the garage door, which is about 5 feet from the basement stairs, I heard something I still can't quite describe. It was like a growl, and a scream, and a roar, and a whisper. It was like nothing I'd ever heard before. It started a short distance behind me and to my right, again, the direction of the stairs, rapidly moved closer to me and getting much louder. I had to cover my ears, and just as quickly faded out a short distance ahead of me to my left. When we got outside, I said, "What in the ever-loving fuck was that?" And my boyfriend had absolutely no idea what I was talking about, even though he was an arm's length from me when it happened. As an aside, I began having sleep paralysis for the first time while all this was happening, only when I slept in my bedroom. It stopped when I moved out. Also, just once, I had a literal premonition in a dream and it saved my life. I swear to God. Also around this time, I still tell myself I was just very stressed and having hallucinations as a result, but I've been more stressed than that without any symptoms of psychosis. It was about 10 p.m. dead of night. Late 90s, small nothing to do town, everything is closed. Despite everything being closed, usually people were still somewhat up and about even this late. You would see people driving around, high schoolers hanging out at the park, convenience stores open, that type of thing. I was sitting in the living room with my brother and we get bored playing video games, so we decide to break curfew, sneak out and go for a walk. No lights were on except for the street lights. No one's porch light was on. No lights inside any of the houses. It was eerily quiet, no cars on the road as we walked. No late night walkers. Just empty roads and silence. No barking dogs. No animals. Nothing. We walked up to the nearby 24-per-hour gas station. Lights off, closed. Even the lights inside, those emergency lights that most stores keep on inside, were off. Spooky. Walked around a bit more and just found no one. Not a single car on the main street of our little bumpkin town. We got creeped out and decided to make it back home in the eerie dead of night. We got back around 10:30. I flicked the TV on. On the local news channel. It was just a still picture of ... hard to explain. I guess a black and white picture of a young boy, probably in his early teens, but he looked like one of those coal mine kids, if you know what I mean. His style of clothing was from a clearly older century and he had one of those floppy post boy type caps on. Soot on his face, hands in his pockets, the gaze of a man who had seen some shit on his young face. No sound. No news chatter. No news story. No news ticker scrolling at the bottom. Just a mute image of this young boy on the screen and nothing else. Flicked to other channels and they were all playing fine, but our local news was stuck on this boy. We changed channels and changed back. Turned the TV off and back on. Unplugged and plugged the cable box in. News was stuck on this creepy image on this creepy night. Really rattled us and I ended trying to calling our mom, who was at a relative's house doing mom shit with her sister. Line just rang and rang. Tried calling some friends at the risk of getting yelled at by their parents at this late hour. Calling, just rang and rang, no one picked up. Started getting actually scared. We sat in the living room flipping between Cartoon Network and the news channel to see if the image was going to go away. Clock hit 11 p.m. Channel flickered back to local news ending and telemarketing picking up. No one believed us. Told our parents and they didn't believe us, said we were bullshitting. No one at school believed us and other kids also said their parents were watching the news that late and there was no weird mineshaft worker kid, just normal news. I told my parents about the gas station being closed, getting myself into trouble for breaking curfew, but when we asked what happened to the gas station last night, the guy said he hadn't heard about them closing early. To this day I have absolutely no clue what happened, and instead of thinking up some logical error, I choose to believe that was somehow some sort of paranormal world we visited or something. I have absolutely no idea what happened or if we narrowly avoided death despite literally walking around outside middle of the night with the world being this creepy dead silence version of our world. When I was about 10 we moved into this massive old farmhouse that was around 300-400 years old. Dad was the farm manager of the farm, that's why we moved there. Now it was kinda a big freaky feeling house as it had squatters in it for about 6 months, so graffiti on the walls, wallpaper and carpets trashed, that sort of thing, so the parents spent a bunch of time doing it back up. The house had 3 floors, a basement and an attic that was used as what we think was servants' quarters back on the day, and that level did not have a nice feeling. Anyways, when we moved in for the first month, me and my siblings all slept in one room on the second floor while the bedrooms got new wallpaper and carpet, and on the first night I was lying awake unable to sleep, and I could hear the second set of breathing just out of sync with mine that would pause when I did to see if it really was following mine. Both my siblings were hearing the same thing as they woke and told me to stop messing with them, to which I said I wasn't, and we all went very quiet. This carried on the whole time we were in the room. It was freaky, but we kinda got used to it. So not long after that we were sat in my new room playing cards when I heard a swish of fabric, the bedroom door swing open further, then footsteps on a hardwood floor. The hallways had carpet on them now over wood, walking away from the room. Okay, yeah, that was pretty freaky, we all thought, but it got better that night. I got up around 10 p.m. for a leak and some water, so went to the bathroom down the other hallway, and as I was sat on the toilet I hear the sound of footsteps on a hardwood floor, walk up and stop outside the bathroom door, then hear a woman tutting under her breath, then the footsteps move away down the hall towards the bedrooms. Me freaking out ran back to my bed and hid under the covers. We began to call this thing Mrs. Woman, pretty iconic name. And I like to think she was the original owner of the house anyway. Turns out the room we all slept in the first night was the room she seemed to like the most, and you could sit in that room and ask her questions and she would bang on the floor. It was freaky as heck. I know this is long, but we lived there for 10 years, so there was loads of strange things. Above were my everyday sort of things, and Mum woke with a start one night to a woman's outline backlit from the curtains stood above her bed, and my little brother used to scream out at night that there was a man outside his window holding on to the bars, old safety bars on the second floor windows. Oh, and when I slept in the room he had that in, it always had one corner way darker than the other. It was a strange and weird 10 years. Not saying I believe in ghosts, but holy shiz, they're def something. Also, that house was used as a field hospital in the English Civil War, and when they plotted the fields they would commonly find musket balls and old coins. Anyways, I'm terrible at telling stories, hope something read it all, ha 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 ha. Edit. I forgot to add, the day we moved out Mum and Dad were having an argument in the lounge and this black mass / shadow moved between, then it went ice cold and they ran out of the house. I never believed in ghosts until I moved into my old apartment. It was built in the 1920s and it was a small building in a very affluent location. The landlady left this out when we were touring, but she told my neighbors that the building was partially destroyed by a fire a long time ago when a man passed out drunk with a lit cigarette inside, killing himself in the process. I was very close with all my neighbors, which was awesome. My live-in boyfriend and neighbor down the hall and I were often the only ones home because they were unemployed. I worked from home, and everyone else had jobs outside the home. One day my boyfriend comes in asking if I was playing a prank on him and the neighbor who were hanging out at neighbor's apartment. I was working and I'm not a prankster, so I was pretty confused. He said someone knocked on the neighbor's door and then held it closed when they tried to open it. The person ran off and there was no trace of them when BF got the door open. He seemed pretty spooked, but I was like, oh, it's probably the wind or something. He was adamant that the knocking was clear and rhythmic, not like wind rattling. He mentioned a few times after that he saw a dark shadow. The ghost. At the time I was like, okay sure, but more and more I started hearing stories of encounters from my neighbors. There was a pattern. Upstairs in the apartment where the fire started, my neighbor would see a shadow laying on the floor, or he would randomly trip over nothing. Downstairs in the apartment below the fire and where the knocking thing happened, he would often get knocking on his doors and windows, or sometimes his doors would just swing open by themselves. I started to wonder. Then I saw it. It was the weirdest thing. I was standing in my kitchen cooking for everyone in the building, when out of the corner of my eye I see someone tall standing in the kitchen. I say, hey, what's up? And look around to see. Nothing. No one. I go back to cooking and it's back in the same spot. I jiggle my glasses thinking it's just playing tricks on my eyes, but the figure doesn't move. Until I turn around again and it's gone. I'm stiff for a minute and then I realize it's not being threatening. I figure it's curious about the food or something. So, feeling sort of foolish, I start talking to it and telling it what I was cooking and asking if it needed anything. Eventually it did leave. I told my neighbors. I told them I think it's just trying to vibe with us. The encounter that completely changed me from a skeptic to a believer was after that. It was that time of day again where everyone was at work and my BF was hanging out with the neighbor. So I was alone. I was making some lunch and clear as day I hear someone say hello. When I say clear as day I mean, it was not coming through a wall, or through a phone. It sounded like it was someone in the same room as me. I looked for the source obviously. I thought my BF had popped in. But no one was there. I stopped cooking, went down the hall, and asked my BF and neighbor. They were just as confused as me. But yeah, I've wondered a lot about life after death since then. And what it feels like being a hungry ghost. I used to be an atheist, believed in no sort of higher consciousness or divine alignment or anything. Okay, so I used to wear this necklace with the Eye of Horus on it. It belonged to my brother but, stole it off him. If you know the story of the Eye of Horus, there are already parallels. One day, around the time psychedelics exposed me to the uglier aspects of myself and I began the journey of correction and healing, I lost the necklace. I'd expect that to be somewhat devastating. I really loved that thing. But I wasn't fazed. My girlfriend at the time and I both felt as if it would pop back up. We searched the pockets of every item of clothing and practically turned the house upside down looking for it to no avail, still not fazed. A few very intense months go by, very spiritually charged time as I discover new possibilities and ways to live. Then one night, have the most vivid dream of my life that I can still remember in almost perfect detail. I'm standing in my room, wearing my leather jacket. In the dream I'm experiencing intense acid visuals, room glowing, fractals, the whole shebang. I reach into my pocket and can feel the necklace. Until this point he haven't acknowledged I'm dreaming or thought about it at all. I state better check that out in the morning and the dream ends. Wake up in the morning and check the jacket pockets. Nothing. About a week or two later my friend invites me over to trip acid. I have a crazy trip. Very mentally oriented. Felt like I was having information beamed into my head as a constant stream. At one point the visuals form a hard grid dicing up reality and my mind went, this is how you see the world. It made a lot of sense. Everything was tucked away in its own little box and that box again in a larger box. Then I felt a force sweep through my body to the left and at the same time the visual grid glided accordingly to let me view it from another angle. My mind states, this is how your brother sees the world. The near grid I saw is still there but from my newfound angle I can see that none of the squares were actually square and nothing was ever in its little box. It was always a perceptual illusion. From my new point everything was bleeding into everything else and the lines that dice were Fibonacci spirals all interlocked. For the next hour or so I uncontrollably have all of my brother's mannerisms. The way he held his weight and the way he timed his jokes, his exact stutter. It was very scary. I was him and I had no control over it. While I'm him my thoughts no longer followed their usual grid-like pattern but flowed uncontrollably and undeniably matched the visual representation I had. A few hours later I'm still tripping balls and my ex is starting an argument with me and I can feel it leading me to a bad trip. It's stressing me out a lot because, felt like I was learning so much about what's possible in this world and she's going to send me into a bad trip. I feel an intense energy above me, as if there was a heavy cloud that vertical bar had just stood up into. I reach into my jacket pocket and pull out the necklace. We both just stare at the thing in my hand, tripping balls as the Eye of Horus stares back at us. The alignment was just too surreal. I had told her about the dream beforehand. She knew it was my brother's necklace and she had watched me embody and understand my brother just hours before. She had been there as I wore this jacket almost every day and pulled countless things out of that very pocket, Hell, we both had searched the jacket when the necklace first went missing some 5 or 6 months prior. Argument ended on the spot. We just cuddled and she tried to keep her mind off of the implications of that event. I obviously cooled. I realized then and there that some power had contorted reality in such a way to give me that experience. My mind went to the concept of hell, and ever since I've been particularly partial to the experience of guilt. I'm unrecognizable now, as you'd imagine. What's even cooler is that I figured out how it must have occurred. The inner pocket of the jacket wasn't sewn closed properly. The fabric was just sort of twisted right. The necklace, being a sort of flat wedge shape, must have wiggled its way through into the lining of my jacket, where it lived for 6 months. Then while I'm rolling around on the ground as my brother, I must have shimmied it back through the twist in the fabric of reality, and into the pocket again, to be found a few hours later. That much I'm pretty sure of. It's the only thing I can think of that makes any sense at all. As for the dream, I'm no neurologist, so I can only speculate. My theory is that at some point I subconsciously felt the necklace in the lining of my jacket, and my brain somehow inferred that it'd be on acid when I found it. By the way, that's the only time I've dreamt that I was tripping, and this is also the only dream that I can remember in full visual detail. I for the most part can't think visually, I just hear a voice, no images. So for me to be able to recall that space with such rich visual dynamic accuracy is quite something. TLDR, symbolic possession fell into limbo, experienced, dream predicting it would be found in my jacket while on acid. Fulfilled a week later after a weirdly interconnected interbody experience. E.g. magic. Grandparents' old house, several occurrences. For context, this house wasn't that old, maybe from the early 60s, but the original builder of the home did pass away in the master bedroom. He lived alone and was handicapped, important because every door in the house was a sliding door and a little wider than your standard door frames. Before my grandparents bought and renovated the place, it sat abandoned for years. I spent a lot of time in this house. We lived there for some time with my grandparents, too. They were never affected by anything that happened, and they insist to this day that we made these stories up, despite the detail in several accounts. First thing I remember, I was maybe 9 or 10 years old, and I woke up in the middle of the night for a glass of water. You leave water at my bedside table every night since then for this reason. As I slid open our bedroom door, I shared with my brother, who was sound asleep. I remember the goosebumps down my arm, and I felt like someone else was awake. My dad worked at Disneyland at the time, and he wouldn't get home until 12 or 1 a.m. nightly. I don't remember what time it was, but I do remember tiptoeing down the hall, to the foyer, and seeing all their cars in the driveway. I turned around then, my heart racing and my back to the front door, and instantly, a weird, mist-like, cold wind blew right past, through me. I burst into tears and ran into my grandparents' room, since they slept on the same side of the house as we did. I've never forgotten that sensation, and I still couldn't tell you what the fuck ran past, through me. Flash forward a few years. I'm in middle school now. We no longer live with my grandparents, but my brother slowly started to show more and more hesitancy with sleeping there overnight. He kept saying that something would watch him in the guest bedroom. Our parents would laugh, our grandparents still laugh. I always believed him though, especially since his night terrors were simultaneously worsening. Second instance. One Saturday night, I decided to spend the weekend at Grandma's house. I remember falling asleep with my earbuds in, music playing, glasses on top of the comforter. I knew I had been chatting with friends on FB late into the night, as I had confirmed the next morning. But I woke up, middle of the night again, and I had been tucked perfectly into bed. My earbuds were wrapped in a near-perfect circle on the nightstand, my phone was standing upright on the windowsill, leaning against the window. Weirdest part. My glasses had been folded and placed right side up on the floor against the bedroom door. When I woke up the next morning, tasked both Grandma and Grandpa if they had checked up on me in the night and why, if they had done so, they decided to strew my things across the room. In my grandma's words, Grandpa did get up to go to the bathroom, but he said you locked your door. I never locked the doors before, and I certainly hadn't that night. It's kind of a no-no within our family. As it turns out, they thought I was watching porn. If you ask me, it felt a lot more like was the one being watched. Third and final occurrence. Few years forward again, junior year of high school. The house had just gotten burglarized a year or so before. My grandparents asked me to house sit while they spent the Labor Day weekend in Arizona. My girlfriend at the time joined me for the staycation. Our first night, we got into the liquor cabinet. Poured ourselves some Crown Black and Sierra Mist over ice. Drank some, put up the music, and we started horsing around on the couch. I was in the midst of removing my shirt when she stopped me and pointed, eyes full of fear, at the table. Sure enough, my glass, still half full, condensation, yes, but it was on a foam coaster. Was inching ever so slightly across the table. The table itself was glass, and I tried to reason it as the water and the coaster acting weird in some unexplainable, physics way, but it was being pushed faster and faster until I had to catch it before it fell off the edge. Shirt immediately went back on, and her and I jumped straight into bed. I had to really talk her into staying with me. She's very religious, always has been, that weekend. Nothing else happened during our stay there, and my grandparents would end up selling the house later that same year. Since been remodeled. Just recently, my brother and I smoked a bowl together and had a really intense, reflective conversation about our childhoods. Somehow, we started talking about that house. Turns out, he saw a shadow-like figure in and around the fireplace multiple times, and his aversion to the guest room stemmed from the fact that he had once seen a white face pressed against the outside of the window. I shared my own experiences with him again. He remembered the sliding cup, one, and so we thought to ask our parents if they remembered anything specific about the house/its eccentricity. Our mom admitted that she had been woken up before by the doors sliding open and shut on their own, but I'm more unnerved to have found out that, according to our grandpa, the original owner, builder never had kids despite really wanting to do so. He remained single as a result. Our grandpa knew this from the realtor who had sold the house to both our grandparents and to the previous owners in the mid-70s. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.